In this episode, which is a two-part episode, I interviewed writer Matthew Page about his new book, 100 Bible Films, and we also reviewed a film from 1975 called The Messiah, the Italian film. The translation is Il Messia. This was directed by Roberto Rossellini, and it starred Pier Maria Rossi. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast exploring storytelling on film, as well as interviews with industry professionals who work in film, television, and theater, and other areas of the arts. I want to welcome to the show Matthew Page, who is a UK-based film historian, writer, and independent scholar who has been researching adaptations of the Bible in film for over 20 years. He has contributed to a variety of books and journals on the subject and runs the popular Bible Films blog, biblefilms.blogspot.com. And we're discussing his new book today, which just came out earlier this year, 100 Bible Films. Matthew, welcome. Thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me on. I've been really looking forward to talking to you today. So that's good. Yeah.
Me too. I thank you again for the book. I really enjoyed it. There was so much I learned, so much that I just had no idea how many Bible films there are, and this is just 100.
yeah. This is just the 100 of the most important ones. But yeah, thank you for that. It's very kind of you to say. And I've really enjoyed a lot of your YouTube videos. So it's really nice to be able to come and talk to you today about these films, and particularly the one we're going to look at in particular later. So
no, thank you. I'm looking forward to diving into that, but I just had some questions off the top. I take it from your introduction to the book, you talked about your family introducing you to a lot of these films. So I take it you were brought up as Christian.
I was. My family used to go to church every Sunday, and my grandparents, at least on one side, were very very strong Christians as well. So that was very much my upbringing, and really versed in these stories, and kind of always enjoyed the stories, and enjoyed kind of looking at them, and the different ways of looking at the stories and asking questions around them as well. So yeah.
I just want to mention some of the films that you talked about. Now, there some I had seen, many I had heard of, and then many I hadn't heard of. And some of the ones I discovered, which I hadn't seen before. One of them was Son of Man, 1969. That was great.
Yeah. That's a terrific film.
Yeah, that was a really powerful one. I forget the actor's name who played Jesus.
Colin Blakeney.
Yeah, he was so good. I've never seen such an angry Jesus.
No, it was it's one of my favorites, I think. And the first, funnily enough, it was made for television. It was made for the BBC.
Mm-hmm.
But the first time I got to see it was on a cinema screen, so it was kind of slightly strange, because it was but it just at that kind of size as well, there's just so much energy in his performance, and just so much kind of subtlety there, and he's such a relatable to him. I mean, the kind of the Sermon on the Mount scene is just years ahead of anything. It's still the best Sermon on the Mount scene to me. And it's not a particularly flattering portrait of Jesus in some ways,
right.
And I think it kind of really gets into that sense of the things he said and did, and when we're kind of used to them being these are the things that Jesus said and these are the things he did, but when you kind of look at them in a very contemporary light, aside from you kind of take off the halo, a lot of them are unusual and odd, and if someone was doing these things today, then we would not necessarily be revering him, but maybe be blessing him out of the way. So and I think that film gets that really well. I think it's a great piece of work Dennis Potter, for your readers that don't know it. Dennis Potter,
Yeah.
who's kind of one of the best British playwrights of the 20th century, wrote the play. So yeah, and it's just brilliant realization of the Gospels.
I thought so as well. And it really, because that, during the you had the British New Wave and the kitchen sink dramas at that time, and it very much felt like that. Like, it's gritty and it's black and white. I was reading just some trivia, like I think they shot it in 3 days, and like some people thought that the sets looked like they were going to fall over. Like it was so cheaply made. But it doesn't take anything away from it. I think it adds to the roughness of the bleak. Even the end, there's no music. It's just so bleak. The crucifixion is just,
it's a particularly
really
bleak
something.
ending. Yeah. And I think people often forget with it that, if you had been a follower of Jesus and then he died, that's, they didn't know the end of the story, and that's, that's what they were left with, and just that, it really captures that kind of that utter desolation. And Blakely was he was in kind of a couple of those kitchen sink dramas that you mentioned. So I think he was he's in This Sporting Life.
Yes,
the Richard Burton one, which is I think is my favorite of that movement.
That's a great one. Yeah.
I played rugby for about 30 years. And there's only been a handful of films that have tried and kind of captured that, but it's the only one that even comes close to the feeling of playing the sport itself. We're getting slightly off topic, but,
no, that's okay. That's okay. That's one I have to see again, because I saw it a number of years ago. I've been meaning to check that one out and revisit it. Another one I had, I must have, I'm not sure when the Blu-ray or DVD came out on Hail Mary 1985, the Jean-Luc Godard, because I remember, I don't know, maybe 13 years ago finding it somewhere, and it was such a bad quality that I didn't even bother to watch it. And I remember when I put it on the other night, I thought, oh, okay, yeah, I think he had shot it on videotape or something, but he clearly didn't. I don't know why I thought that. I must have just had a bad copy of it. But anyways, I saw Hail Mary again. For the first time, because like I said, I stopped it the first time. That's really interesting. That was, it's so certain moments of it, because it, Godard, as being a big film buff, as post 70s, like his films, they sort of felt like essays. Essays meet cinema, and it has that quality. So occasionally I get a little frustrated with feeling like I'm watching reading an essay or something, but there's so many powerful moments, and it's a really interesting look of what might this be like for this woman to be young teenager, to be told you're going to have this baby whether you like it or not, which is what we don't look at these stories. I mean, I was brought up Catholic, and when they would talk about the Virgin Mary, it was almost, it always felt like this beautiful dreamlike sequence of like, oh wow, God, you're gonna be the mother of God's child, and then you think, wow, actually, wait a minute, this is a teenager who's being told you're gonna have this baby. And I like how they handled not that Joseph, who was he was an angry, frustrated guy trying to get her love, and he was torn between her and Juliette Binoche, and he was
choice.
Sorry,
a difficult choice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're both beautiful women, and I thought it was interesting that the angels were so angry. They're like, you can't touch her. They're coming down. It was, and she's even testing him, saying, you're not allowed to touch me because of who I am. I thought, and it just had this surreal, there was no explanation. He wasn't trying to explain it in terms of like, on a literal level, like, oh, it's just, this is what it is. She's pregnant and no one touched her, and it doesn't even feel like it's from the Bible, but we all know
Yeah,
what it's from. But I just found it's, I'm having a hard time putting it into words, but it just has this quiet, meditative feel to it. It just
yeah,
captured the sort of despair, even those moments where she's in the bed and she's sort of just hitting the pillows every now and then, feeling trapped in. I know that you spoke highly of it in the book as well.
yeah. I mean, I think it captures I think it captures well kind of a bit of Godard's earlier
Yeah.
work in some of the ways. Because as you say, I think he had gone very essay-like at the time. But I think I mean, again, it's this thing. It's a really interesting look at some of the bits that that we don't focus on, or that kind of,
Mm,
because we've built it, because traditions got built up around these things, get missed over. Um, and in the biblical story, you get the angel gives the news, and Mary breaks into this hymn of praise or whatever.
right.
Um, and then it almost pretty much jumps to the birth, and you
Yeah,
don't get that kind of 9 months of
exactly.
you
Yeah.
know afterwards, and what happened, did that really happen? And I think it just and the being pregnant is a strange, I've only obviously only observed it secondhand when my wife was carrying out my two kids, but um you it's such a strange mixture of emotions and such a strange mixture of
Mm,
things going on. There's a kind of excitement, but a worry, and there's a kind of a joy, and there's also this kind of confusion, strange feeling of your body changing. And I imagine even more so, someone that is either the Marie character in the film, or Mary Jesus' mother, the lightly ages, even more so the kind of strangeness of that physical experience.
mm,
Um, and add in there the kind of the oddness of how it's recorded. It's a really interesting reflection on those changing moods, and the fact that
yes.
it wasn't like there was a kind of angel then sat in the corner of the room for the next 9 months reminding you it's gonna,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is all from, this is all divinely ordained. It's
Mm.
so it's I think it's really interesting from that. And I mean, there was a lot of controversy about the film, but
Oh, yeah, I can
it's
imagine.
actually yeah, but it's actually a very, I mean, this is one of the things that's interesting about some of the films that have been controversial, that they're not always the ones that are incompatible, or not incompatible, that take less of a orthodox angle on stuff theologically, I guess.
Yeah.
There's nothing really I mean, people will probably dislike certain moments of it, but there is, certain other films in the book have a very kind of unorthodox approach to the stories, and to kind of what's been seen as, I suppose, standard Christian theology. And yet a lot of those sailed under the radar, but somehow, particularly I guess when there's kind of elements of sex involved and stuff, that
Mm.
this kind of is created controversy. And this one was almost more controversial than Last Temptation. So
Yeah, yeah, I could, I could see how that, how that would be. Uh, you know, just in terms of, well, I mean, Last Temptation has, of course, has the element of sex with Jesus getting married,
yeah,
and but there, I imagine there's something about the fact that it almost seemed like, well, because it is very much this, a young woman being forced to have a child, how that would, that would make, I suppose, more conservative religious people, feel as though that's something
mm,
wrong had been done, and they didn't want, they
yeah,
didn't want to feel that this was an act that was wrong.
mm,
That's just, I can only speculate.
yeah,
Whereas perhaps Last Temptation, because he still has this, the story. The story is
yeah,
pretty much the same. It's just that the element of what if he
mm,
married and didn't listen to God and wasn't crucified, and
yeah,
but even then it's in his head, because of the way it ends, of course, where
yeah,
he says it is accomplished, right? So
yeah,
I could see how that would be, people would be more angry about Hail Mary.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I kind of understand it, but also it also interests me that it's, I suppose possibly because my own upbringing was a bit less image driven maybe, and was more around kind of ideas and theology and that kind of thing, I suppose. And so I feel I feel perhaps I'm more likely to notice when quite wide divergences in theology, but if the but and not so touched by the imagery that being a bit more provocative or powerful. But
Right.
I mean, there's another film, um, the um, Passover plot, 1976 film, which basically the whole thing is that Jesus was a fraud and it was made up, and he had this plan that he was gonna just drug himself and pull off this trick of being resurrected, and it kind of went wrong. And that's fundamentally kind of a challenge to Christianity in itself, but it got a
Mm,
much got a much lighter ride than the films we've been discussing. So it's
yeah.
it's interesting. I'm not saying I'm not saying those things are right or wrong,
Right.
but yeah, but it always strikes me as interesting that that's some of these little variations.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's still so many that I want to check out.
Mm,
I just wanted to, I wanted to ask because clearly from the way you write about the films,
mm,
you're not just talking about the content, but you're also talking about filmmaking in a way
yeah.
where I could see, okay, Matthew clearly knows about movies. You clearly
Mm.
know about um, the language of cinema. So what is your background just in with film in general? How did you learn so much about filmmaking?
Well, I mean, it's mainly because I'm old. It's I've just I haven't got any formal training in it, but I've just been kind of fascinated by it for probably the last 25 years, and made a point of trying to watch stuff and to read stuff. And actually, I mean, this subject has been, as you said in your introduction, I've been looking at this subject for 20 years,
Mm,
and I think a lot of getting my head around some of these films in the book has then spurred me on to find out more about filmmaking and the people that made them. And so Rossellini, for example, we're going to talk about in a little while. You know, I first discovered him. Yeah, I think I first discovered him because I knew about this film, but then I found out about Open City
right.
and then Paisan, and before I know it, I've kind of got most of his back catalogue that is available, and really got into it. And similarly, you know, with Pasolini, and one of the things that I would really want to get across with the book is how this subject has been one of those that has drawn some of cinema's greatest artists to it,
Mm,
and
mm,
that I don't think that gets realized enough. And I think there's a continuation. I mean, that's certainly the experiences of kind of painting and other visual arts through the kind of through the Renaissance, and even before that, and throughout the kind of
right.
post-Roman and post-Roman history. It's been the subject that has drawn some of the finest artists of all kinds to it, and that's continued in the 20th century with film. And so in some ways this subject is a really good way to get a bit of that sense of the breadth of cinema, because it's such a well done story at times. We've got some of these kind of amazing filmmakers doing it, but also it's so widely told, and it's what story that's been told right back from the very early days of silent film, and
Yes.
films in the 19th century. It's still getting variations put on today, different genres, not just biblical epics. And so I think it's a really, because it's a fixed point as well, and the stories are kind of fixed. It's really interesting to see how the different waves of filmmaking kind of pass over it. It's kind of quite a good observation point of that broader, the broader movements that are going on.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I was really fascinated by the way you pointed all that out, that really from the beginning of
Mm,
movie making, like with the second year of 1896, we started to see these stories told on film. And as you said, it's
yeah.
because also because the stories that people know, right? So they had that
Mm,
audience that were going to be interested because a lot of these stories are so well known. But you know, I we don't think of film history in terms of this genre, the Bible
yeah.
genre, but you clearly prove that cinema and the Bible films were the language of cinema was being written. I'm not saying only with Bible films, but
No.
with so many with so many of these stories, and yet that is not something that I think is really pointed out. I mean, we think of gangster movies perhaps as being something you saw from the beginning, many, 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 many times over, if there's
Yeah.
something to. But it seems as if this is a genre that they were experimenting with the form and writing the language with so much. So did
Mm.
you ever give any thought as to why that is, not something discussed very much? I mean, maybe we can only speculate, but
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a couple of things there. Ultimately, by the kind of end of well, kind of mid to the end of the 60s, the kind of epics have become so much the focus and become seen as the way to do the story. Uh, and of course, they fell frightfully out of fashion, not just the biblical ones, but also the Roman ones for a while and the Greek ones and a lot of those other style. And the kind of the elements of camp in them became, seen as derisory, and still are in some ways. And other genres became popular. I mean, particularly kind of if you look at, say, for example, horror,
or yeah.
has become, which itself was quite unfashionable at one stage, but now is incredibly fashionable
Mm, mm,
uh, genre. And so I think it's partly because of that. I think it's partly because, I mean, I can't speak very well into the situation in the US, but I know certainly here, um, religion's become much more seen as much more of a private thing, and although still a lot of the population express a kind of vague belief in God, a kind of in terms of practicing Christianity or people that regularly go and kind of believe some what might be called some kind of version of traditional Christianity, they're quite low numbers, and it doesn't really, yeah. And I think particularly amongst people of kind of Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and particularly in the kind of people that tend to get into film studies, that kind of tends to be quite a middle class discipline, I think. And I think those groups in particular have kind of got to the stage that it's, you know, we don't really do religion anymore.
right.
And famously, it was a kind of famous statement Tony Blair's team made about not doing God and all that stuff being consigned. And I think yeah, and so I think there's just a kind of a sense of they can't. It's just fallen from fashion for those reasons, both kind of because of the film legacy, but also because of the place of faith and because some of these films are great, but a lot of them are not so good. And
Right.
some of them you have to really want to appreciate them. They're very easy. I made a decision fairly early on when I was looking at this that I was going to focus on the positives about these films and what we can learn about these films and what we can appreciate in them. Because I think if you sit there um, and decide to tear more or less any Bible film apart, then it's very easy. And actually, I think that applies for most genres really, and most
Mm,
films. But I think there's perhaps something extra easy about doing it with biblical films. Even ones that are well made and people can take a lot from. But
right. Right. That was another something which was really original for me to see you write not just to praise these 100 films, but you do point out a lot of the flaws, not just in terms of content, but even perhaps your opinions of flaws in the filmmaking. So was that now when you sat down and picked 100, were you also thinking in terms of, okay, well, these are the best, but there's problems with them, and therefore I should highlight that, or did that just come out organically as you were writing it?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a difficult process narrowing the 100 down. I mean, there's kind of at least 800 out there. I've not seen that many, but I've seen a lot of them, and it was a really painful, long process that went, just when I thought I got it sorted, I'd come across something else, and I thought, well, that has to be in the book. But I was trying to tick a lot of boxes with things. I really wanted to get a breadth of geography in it. I didn't want it to all be kind of American or European films. I wanted to include other continents where this story is influential and still has a role as well. I wanted to kind of have that spread of church history. I have that spread of film history, and so although there's a slight imbalance towards more recent films, it's pretty good, I think. And I wanted to get the range of stories as well that are kind of in the Bible, because there are these terrific stories which, from a kind of literary angle, are really important to our culture and have influenced our culture, but also, they're great stories as well. And so I wanted to kind of capture all of that. And then it was really kind of a case of trying to take each film on its own merits. So I didn't have a kind of set formula for how I was going to write about a film. I kind of tried to write about the things that I thought were the important things to put across each one. And sometimes that involved kind of pointing. I think I didn't want to let any film off entirely. There were maybe one or two films where I could have done that. And I didn't want to completely slate any film, because I kind of, I've never made a film, and in some senses, I'm in awe of any director who manages to get everything to come together and have a final product, particularly, if it's an hour and a half. So I kind of felt there needed to be a bit of some of the, each of those things. But I wanted to focus more on the positives, and then just kind of mention a couple of, perhaps some of the negatives as in general. But each film, I wanted to treat them on their own merits rather than bring my own template to, well, I'm going to approach this from a social critical point of view, or I'm going to just talk about this in terms of character, or in terms of how it matches the original story. I kind of felt that there was no, because they're so diverse, there was no one approach that was going to work for all these films and treat them in a good way. And I think I wanted to make people think, oh, that sounds interesting, and I want to see that film, and to get what that film was about, rather than trying to import my own agenda.
Right.
I mean, obviously I'm still importing my own agenda, but I was trying to minimize that as much as possible.
Yeah, no, I thought I felt that. I mean, I thought that you really succeeded with that, and also highlighting that, that a lot of these films are because I can only speak for my general impression, but I get the impression that when people, let's say, who are not religious, and they think of the Bible in general, they connect that with, right wing or conservative leaning. So it's or that it's something to convert them. That the stories are something to preach the religion onto them. And I mean, that may be true to an extent, but the story of Christ is very much someone trying to rebel against a corrupt system, which is, I mean, anybody can, you watch something like Son of Man or Pasolini's The Gospel According to St. Matthew. I mean, it's so they're just timeless. I mean, it's,
Mm.
you could say that you could just say that's like Martin Luther King, or that's, like a number of people with similar messages. So I imagine maybe that has to do with this sort of distance with connecting film criticism with the Bible. I could only give my own impression, but do you think that, people who aren't religious, do you think when they think of Bible, they connect that with something that's sort of, right wing leaning, or something to preach to them? Or I
I,
don't
I,
know
th-
if you had any thoughts on that.
I mean, I think that I think I think there's a lot of variation, and probably between here in America. In my own experience, I've known I've known a lot of people that have done terrifically kind of compassionate, world-changing things because of their faith, and because of what they see in the words of Jesus and his
Right.
example. And you also don't have to look very far before you end up with stories of people that have been motivated by their beliefs, their Christian beliefs, to do horrendous things.
Right.
And it's and that's a really interesting dynamic, and a really important one. And I think I've been very struck with over the last few years with with Donald Trump, that just
Right.
the support he has amongst people that perhaps are more familiar with the Bible than even most Christians.
Right.
And that and the fact that this you've got those kind of almost opposing dynamics of for some people these what we find in these stories and in the Bible is this motivating center of good that drives them on to be better people. On the other hand, you get things like the Crusades, and you get kind of some of the anti-Semitic acts we've witnessed in
Yeah.
the last 150 years, and throughout church history, and all and all kinds of things. And people take position on modern day. I don't want to kind of get into modern day politics, but um, those things seem completely opposed to one another, and
Right.
yet they're kind of drawing on the same source, and it seems to heighten those things as well. Um, the the religious fervor that drives a mob versus the kind of huge amounts of self-sacrifice that people make to look out for people less vulnerable than themselves. And it's it's just a kind of, there's a fascinating dynamic there that it's very that I think is really important. And I think often there's a lot of people, I suppose, people I think of in my country, in my kind of social class, the tendency is to kind of think, and I guess particularly perhaps people that are atheists, that the tendency is to think, well, we've kind of outgrown that. We've kind
Right.
of, that's not really true. We no longer kind of take that as true, and so we're just going to kind of quietly forget about it. Whereas I kind of feel, no, if we've learned anything through the 21st century, it's that kind of religious belief keeps going on, and
Yeah.
people discovered after 9/11 there was a kind of new, people started realizing, well, we've maybe been ignoring religious studies, or we've kind of knocked it down and not seen as important, and then suddenly we've got this kind of situation we had after that. And I think, again, with the kind of rise of the Christian right in America, and the kind of relatively close alignment between a lot of the hardcore kind of Trump supporters
Right.
and those kind of some of those kind of evangelical churches, that that this is an issue that's not going away, and that's continuing to have an influence. And I think
Hmm.
to ignore it and to not really think about it seems a mistake to me. It seems
Yeah.
short-sighted. And these are I think these are stories that are worth getting our heads around, and looking at how they're told, and wanting to and I think partly I wanted to kind of bring get into that, and to to start looking at how the stories are told and how they can be viewed, and how they're viewed through modern eyes and how they have been, viewed in the past. And that's one of the, again, going right back to the early silent films. Sorry, I'm talking at length, but it's fascinating for me going back to those early silent films.
Right.
And this is history itself. We're talking about the history of the biblical stories, but we've got films here from 120 years ago that show us how people thought about Jesus and how people thought about religion
Right.
120 years ago, and how and we can see the kind of films that were the kind of religious films that were circulating in Germany before, in the years leading up to the Holocaust.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and how and how they portray Jewish people in those
Right.
ways, and how some of those things haven't necessarily moved on that much. And so it's so I think it's an important subject, and I think it's a mistake when people think that because they don't give it mental assent, that it's therefore not important, and doesn't affect how the world is run these days, because I think it does.
You on the topic of the anti-Semitism that runs in these films, and as which Christians have held on to this. I'm not saying all Christians, but there, for centuries there has been this way to blame Jewish people for the death of Jesus. And as you pointed out, some of the films, the German films right before the World War II, that they, that the Nazis were using almost like an example to justify, the killing all these Jewish people. So that's something I hadn't actually really thought of, because it was, and as you said, it's just this view that, oh well, yeah, well, if it was in Jerusalem, then the Jewish people did it. But and I must admit, even I often will forget that the Romans were the guys in charge, right? And it's almost something that just gets into our psyche. And I mean, why do you think this? Is there something in the Bible that people just held on to? That why did this anti-Semitism, of that the Jewish people killed Christ? I mean, how did that even start? I mean, do you have any idea why that thought started?
I mean, that's a very big question.
Yeah.
And I think there's a few different answers to it. I mean, I think it's a slow story, I think, generally, and there are perhaps times where there's been an accelerated movement forward of it, and perhaps times when things have been rolled back. But I think it, possibly goes back to not that long after Jesus' death, and you start to get the church starting to separate itself out from Judaism, at some point, and there being some kind of tension along those lines, potentially, and perhaps that died away. But you kind of certainly are getting, by the start of the second millennium, Christianity is very much in the ascendancy. It's the it's the kind of the big faith, and some of these other ideas come around. So you start to get the kind of Crusades at this time, and perceptions of Judaism are kind of have got quite bad by that stage. Some of it, and some of the stuff that's going on in Crusades is about power, and perhaps some of the Jewish people are in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's very difficult to kind of, I'm sure there are some excellent books on this, but it's very difficult. There wasn't particularly one event that started things, but what you find is that you get a kind of a building of tradition and certain things going on, and things getting passed on and passed on and passed on, and not necessarily, and because of that, and because the kind of Christianity and Christianity's imagery is so pervasive, even in our society today, and and even in movies today that have nothing to do, in theory, with Christianity, that those things kind of get inherited as well. And so, yeah, and so a lot of these kind of understandings, people don't really know why. So one of the things I talk about in the book is the difference between how Caiaphas is portrayed as the kind of
Right.
the chief priest, the chief Jewish priest, and how Pilate is portrayed as the kind of the head Roman on the
Yeah.
scene.
Yeah, that had
And
never dawned on me. It just,
yeah,
again, like from watching Jesus of Nazareth, the miniseries, and the Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson's,
yeah,
it just, it wasn't until you said that in the book, and then seeing the different interpretations, like Son of Man, where Pontius Pilate is like, I've never seen such a vicious
yeah,
portrayal. I mean, he's really mean. Whereas like
yeah,
when Rod Steiger, nothing, I love Rod Steiger, but it's just the way it was portrayed. Like
mm,
he is, you're right. Like he's so, like he's noble and trying to be fair, and the Jewish
yeah,
high priest is like this really evil person, and the Jewish people are pushing Pontius Pilate to kill Jesus. And
yeah,
it never really dawned on me. Well, I just thought, well, that's the story in the Bible. I don't know,
yeah,
but I don't know if,
yeah,
I mean, is there something in the Bible that people, that like one of in any of the Gospels where people interpreted these events that way? Or it's just interesting to me that even to this day, people, still very much are experiencing that story that way.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of it is about this passing down. I mean, there are a few passages that that have nudged things in these directions, perhaps, but at the same time, we're looking at those from the point of view of the fact that we know these kind of bits and pieces played out in these ways. That wasn't necessarily something that necessarily had to turn out that way. That's just how it did, and we kind of see it from now. I think probably the passage that most readily comes to mind is I think it's Matthew 27. In Matthew 27, I think it's 55, when Jesus, when the kind of the people are pressuring Pilate the crowd is pressuring Pilate to crucify Jesus, and they say, his blood be on us and our people. And that's one of the verses that has become
I see.
used in kind of the most anti-Semitic way, and had been used to justify a lot of anti-Semitic violence.
I see. I
Um,
see.
and some people would say that was always the intention of that verse. I think that's not necessarily the case. I think there are theological interpretations of that verse that that didn't have to be interpreted that way, but have kind of been hijacked, and then that became the rallying cry. And now this is the verse that, I mean, it's always, given everything that's gone before, right, it always makes me wince. There's always a bad sign in that when that verse is included. And I mean, I won't go into all the detail on the Passion of the Christ, but there's a kind of whole thing with Mel Gibson in that verse that he had it in originally, and people told him he should take it out because of
Right.
its anti-Semitic association. So in the end, he took the subtitle off, but he kind of said he'd had to do that because otherwise they were going to come for me.
Oh my
And
God.
it's just,
Yeah.
it's just, and it's just, and then on, other, later versions, the subtitle was back in, and it's, it's, but it's, but at the same time, some of these other things, I mean, artistic traditions had a role in this, and people trying to make things play. But it is, it's always interesting. You can always tell which actor is going to be Judas. Which actor is going to be
Right.
Pilate, which one's going to be Caiaphas, and how they dress and how they act and how they,
Right.
that
Right.
whole all those things are kind of around. And we've got no idea what the two of them look like.
Right.
You know, Caiaphas could look like Harry Styles, and uh, for all we
Yeah.
know, and
Right.
there's so many other elements where we have text, and it's not the kind of text that says Pilate stood up before the crowd, and the crowd were exactly this many, and they were distributed
Yeah.
like this and this.
Yeah.
We don't know the size of that space. We don't know, and some elements of the context that we're given have kind of been brushed over, again because of the way the story's been told, and because it's been used in often anti-Semitic content. So the fact that if you go into Mark's Gospel, which was probably the one that was written first, and look really carefully through it, that crowd isn't there to get Jesus crucified; it's there to get Barabbas off. And
Right.
and
Right.
it's and then there's perhaps, as that story is moved on by the later gospel writers, that distinction gets perhaps lost a little bit, or isn't included. We know that gospel writers, they're upfront about the fact themselves that they selected what they were writing from more material. We have such a small amount of material compared to what we'd like to know, and so it's and so artistic interpretations have filled that out, and often those artistic interpretations either themselves have had a negative agenda, or they've been from a culture where it's had a negative agenda to Jewish people, or they've kind of inherited the same, or they're working with their own inherited tradition. They're not even really thinking about it.
Exactly.
So
yeah. Well, because like I said, I had never thought of it either. Because one of the stories of the Bible that I often think of, and I know you mentioned that people have said this as well, is the Zeffirelli miniseries, Jesus of Nazareth, and that has the big crowd scenes, where everyone is demanding, the Jewish people are demanding Jesus die to let go of Barabbas, and I remember in school they would show that, like that was the film. It's a mini series, but that was the one that we would visually experience, and I haven't seen it probably since I was a kid, but the image of the actor who plays Christ in that one is very, for some reason, has really stood out so much amongst all the other portrayals. I don't know what it is. I forget what's the actor's name who plays
Robert
in
Powell.
there. Robert Powell.
Yeah.
Any did you ever give any thought, why is it that particular actor has been sort of connected with that part more than anyone else?
I think it's a few different things. I think it's partly the way it's portrayed, and the kind of distinctions, the portrayal. So I mean, I talk about this briefly in the book, and I've kind of got a blog post about this elsewhere. But there's this strategy that Zeffirelli uses that is very much it's almost the romance film language. So you kind of see it's a series of set pieces, but around these one-to-one meetings that are kind of, and they kind of, you kind of zoom into, you gradually kind of come into these two people, Jesus and this other person, and then there's a series of kind of over the shoulder or point of view shots looking at the person and going backwards and forwards, and then there's some kind of form of physical touch and physical affection, and then a kind of closing two shot, and so the way it's shot is almost kind of made to make you kind of love Jesus. I think in that,
I see what you're saying.
It's a very kind of, there's a real intimacy to it. And the way it's kind of, so it's partly that. I think it's also partly an accident of kind of history and where television was at that stage. And so it was the first, I mean, it was really well done. It was a massive budget. It was a big event in its time, and because of that, it became the kind of the one that was on telly all the time.
Right.
And
right.
Because it was because it was well made, people liked it. It didn't upset many people. It became the thing that was on every Easter somewhere. We'll be showing it for
always
for most of the 80s and bits of the 90s as well. and it was approved of by the Catholic Church, loved it, and so that it meant that a lot of school children saw it at school, like yourself, and so it's part it. So I think, and it was kind of, I mean, child friendly is not quite the right word, but it wasn't the Passion of the Christ, and it wasn't
Right,
Last
that's
Temptation
true.
of Christ.
Yeah,
It
no,
was a
not at
very
all.
kind of sanitized version of things that kids could watch,
Yeah,
impressionable age, and so I think that's and so I think it's a real combination, and it's for what it's trying to do, it does it very well. I mean, the unblinking eyes thing is also a kind of a genius decision by Robert Powell to do that.
right.
And I think that also kind of adds to its allure, that
Yeah,
it just and so I think it's just it's a whole range of things that really meant that at that stage, because I remember growing up and people saying, when they picture Jesus, they picture Robert Powell,
right,
and
exactly.
he's
Yeah,
he's the one they picture.
yeah,
Which
yeah.
is
I remember reading him saying that he resembled so the paintings of Jesus so much, so many from the is it though from the Renaissance period? Is it that, or the,
yeah
I believe so.
yeah
Um,
yeah
that he was saying that he would, when he would show up on set, if the crew was, let's say, swearing and they saw him, they
yeah
would stop. I mean, he really I mean, he does. It
You
is
get a
like,
lot of these stories around these films, though. You do,
yeah,
but
yeah,
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 but
no,
yeah, he
it's
was very much drawing on that kind of Renaissance
right,
era stuff.
right, yeah, which of course from from the Western world, that is often what we think of, right? Is the
Yeah,
really good, he's beautiful blue eyes, really, brown, long brown hair, really good shape. Um,
mm,
yeah, no, it's that was I'll have to see it again sometime, because it's been quite some time. Something you had pointed out, because when we think of these stories, these biblical films, it's often the epics, in the 50s and 60s, Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur. But you had pointed out that the epics actually had started really in Italy with
yeah,
After 6 Days, 1920, which was in Italy. It was is just over an hour. What was it about? I mean, if it started in Italy, I haven't seen this film, but um, how did the epic, you know, expressing these stories in an epic way? How did that begin? Was that just sort of um populating the scenes with a lot of people and spectacle? Is that how the language of that developed?
yeah. I think so. I mean, it's. I think there's various points at which you could say the epic started, or these kind of films started, but even before that, I'll come on to that in a minute. You get this impulse right at the start of film history for camera tricks, and we often kind of think, some people think of film as a kind of offshoot of theatre. It's like performing a play and you record it. Some people
Right.
think of it in terms of literature. Other people think of it in terms of variational photography. There's another category that was doing the rounds when film first started, which was a kind of variation on kind of Victorian sideshow circus type things, and kind of novelties,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and here you've got the various things, and you've got the kind of the man that can do the juggling the knives, and then you kind of go in here and you can see this moving picture, and this kind of spectacle, and and that that became one of the early kind of thrusts in early film. And we see very quickly Georges Méliès and some others getting onto this thing of camera tricks. And even before, and in fact, there was an 1899 Jesus film that Méliès made, Christ Walking on the Water. And here we've got a kind of, I think, it's a double it's a double exposure shot that makes it look like Jesus is walking on the water, and here's his miracle. So so right from the start, you've got this association of camera tricks in photography, in films, being a new thing and a thing that it can do that other art forms can't, and the Bible being a great location for some of these, and because there's all the miracles, and you can do these things that couldn't be done before, and it gets the kind of the people to gasp and see stuff. And then I think you kind of, by the kind of late first decade of the 20th century, you're starting to get decent companies now making a profit, competing with others. You've got cinematic periodicals and journals and all those kind of things trying to sell their version rather than other versions. You've got stuff starting to cross national boundaries and kind of import and export industries going on, and then you start to get that emphasis of, well, how can we outdo what went before? In 1908 you get I can't remember his name. Was it Louis Maggi? Anyway, you get him making The Last Days of Pompeii, and one of the things also that film is often seen as an extension of literature, and in the Victorian era, as we call it over here. Obviously, that wasn't what they called it in Italy, but you had this this number of books being written around the kind of story of Christianity, kind of dramatized version. So this is when Ben-Hur, The Last Days of Pompeii, Quo Vadis, and a few of these books were all written in this kind of second half of the 19th century, and so they start to become the films. There's a ready-made audience for these stories, and they start to be getting. And here's an opportunity to, and these stories kind of start to demand a bigger way of doing things. And so you get 1908, you get Last Days of Pompeii, and there's this kind of incredible scene. There's a scene of the volcano going off through this arch, and the people running, and this crowd of people running around in the thing. And and this is the first, I was going to say it's the first disaster movie. I'm always nervous about claiming things are the first, but this is a very early disaster movie, and it's got this Roman context, and that kind of spurs things on. And then just 3 or 4 years later, then someone else says, well, we can do the same thing, only do it bigger. And so you get Quo Vadis being made, and you get these huge auditorium scenes. The film is kind of considerably longer, and again you start to get you start to get this epic thing going on. And obviously, and Quo Vadis is was not that far off being in this book. It was kind of quite a landmark film, really, in terms of like the running length of the film and some of the stuff it did and some of the tricks it did, and some of the non-trick film techniques it did as well. Was quite, it was all quite groundbreaking. 1914, you then get Cabiria, and Italy really was the place where these kind of big films were being made, and that kind of Christian edge was in the mix. For various kind of political and also kind of cultural history kind of reasons as well. So,
well, I went, partly because we're discussing Rossellini's Messiah. I went through the 100 films, and there was just under 20 that were Italian or co-productions from Italy. So we're seeing a lot of these films from Italy, and I just wanted to jump into the Messiah because I just saw this for the first time, and I always knew this was Rossellini's last film. Scorsese speaks highly of it. Scorsese being like a major fan of Rossellini, was married to his daughter.
Yeah, and that's really taking things to an extremes now,
as we all know. Do you remember how you took to it the first time you saw it?
I really liked it the first time I saw it. I mean, I think I was kind of set up to really like it, but I liked it from the off. And as I say, it kind of quickly got me into Rossellini. I think at the time I'd been looking for a version that I thought was not like the Robert Powell one, that had a bit more had a bit
Yeah.
more to it, felt less ornamental, maybe is not quite the right word, but it's the nearest one I've got. And I'd watched I kind of watched a bunch of them, but this was kind of the turn of the century, really, and it was difficult to get hold of things. And Amazon was still in diapers,
Yeah.
and and the stuff was on VHS, and there was no such thing as YouTube, and and so I've been kind of like, so I basically had to import it from America, and it kind of took a long time to come, and it was quite a, I didn't have much money then, so it was quite an investment. So I was pretty well kind of wired towards by the time it arrived.
Was that a VHS? Because I don't even
It
think
was a
this is on.
VHS, yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I don't even
Yeah, it
think
was a
this is on
VHS.
DVD or Blu-ray now. I don't believe.
There's Italian DVDs
Okay,
of
there
it,
is. Okay.
but they also, I mean, I don't know how many I've got version, but it's for it's Academy ratio. So even that's not even that's not ideal.
Right.
But this was VHS, and I think I had to borrow someone else's telly to be able to watch it, because it was NTSC versus PAL, which was a whole
Yeah.
thing. So I was pretty I it would I think probably I'm not I don't think I probably came to it neutrally. I think I really wanted to like it, and unfortunately I did. So that worked out well. But
Well, what I like so much about the film, and again, this is the first time I saw it, was just how it's so quiet. I mean, he sort of
mm,
takes, and I don't mean this as a criticism. I mean, there is obviously a conflict within it, but he takes all the drama out of it. He takes all the spectacle out of it. He's utilizing a documentary approach very much like he was doing with neorealism. You got these really long takes, and I've never seen anyone use the zoom lens in such a way. Like, he would start close on an actor, and often everyone's in
yeah,
a group, and he would begin to zoom out, and then he would zoom back in, and he'll pan across the entire room of people, and that sounds like that may be distracting to see a camera move that much, but it's not. It's done so seamlessly, and all the various miracles that you know is very well known with Jesus, like curing the blind man, who was blind, and he gave him his vision. Even when meeting Mary Magdalene was not a miracle, but that was always sort of a well-known pivotal story, and he just shoots it from a distance. Like, it's just sort of, there's hardly anybody there. One guy or
mm,
two says they're gonna stone her, and he's like, no, no, no. It's so minimal. It's so quiet. I mean, even the miracle of the fish, getting all the fish when there was a
yeah,
drought, and then he's like, "Oh, try again," and then sure enough, they find all this fish. He leaves it a little more ambiguous whether Jesus was the
mm,
one who made that happen. But everything is so quiet and ordinary, and as a result, I felt a lot of what he was saying landed more on me, and also
mm,
the contrast of the class systems between the rich and the poor, because he's right in there working with everybody. He's shooting it in the south of Italy, and then when you do see the Roman soldiers, and Pontius Pilate, and various other people, the corrupt leaders, it really is rather obvious. It
mm,
really pops. And whereas in other films, I don't remember that hitting me as much, because I think because of the spectacle
mm,
nature of the way they're told. And for me, it was just, it just brought this ordinary quality, and this he's really just this ordinary guy using common sense, and love your
mm,
neighbor, and don't judge others, and don't value money above people. And I like all the different perspectives as well. Like, I've never seen a film where John the Baptist was shown so much. Like, he really
mm.
You know, you see him in prison, you see him saying, you know, hey, I'm free. You can tie me up, but if you kill me, go ahead. I'll just go to
Yeah.
I'll be in the kingdom, right? And you know, I love the young woman talking to the children, and one of the kids is asking, what is Jesus? Why is Jesus trying to teach people so much? That's not the exact line. And then she says, well, you know, he's here to remind people to be good because as adults, people forget. And I was like, that's a really good point. you know, um, but I really enjoyed it. I mean, I just thought
Yeah.
just it's so slow and in a good way, and starts from well before he's born too. I mean, it
Mm.
goes I mean, there's not a lot of scenes with him as a child. Like, there's the one where he goes missing, and then of course
Yeah.
when Herod was going to kill all the firstborns because he was threatened by the birth of Jesus, and you know you see them getting away, but it's it's really beautifully done. I felt. I mean, just holding back the camera made such a difference. Like he hardly cuts in for close-ups, you
Mm.
know. It's quite something. Was that your is that your experience with the film, or did you see it in a different way?
Yeah. You just made such a lot of interesting points there. Don't quite know where to kick off
Sorry,
from.
maybe
I
I should
think
have done point by point.
yeah, no, no, it's great. It's really nice to hear. It's I think putting this in the context of Rossellini's other films,
Yeah,
I think is
yeah,
interesting because he's kind of um, so his kind of breakthrough, Rome Open City, which I know you've done in another one of these
yeah,
podcasts,
yeah,
uh, and yeah, that kind of so he did the neorealism thing for a while, and then that kind of moved on, and some of his films went a bit more commercial, and
yeah,
you kind of get things like General Della Rovere,
yeah,
um, and some of his other ones. But eventually he kind of he's kind of wrestling around with this, and eventually in around the start of the '60s, he kind of has this press conference and says, cinema è morte, cinema is dead, and he
yeah,
he decides that he wants to start going to television and making television films in as neutral a way as possible to kind of tell the story of history and to tell the story of these great characters from history. And so he does a whole series of these films that are shot in quite a similar fashion. I mean, his technique is developing as we go through. But so we get, kind of Socrates, we get Augustine the Hippo, there's Cartesius, um, the Medici in there, Louis XIV, and the Apostles is another one of the films in the book that is on that, and then he kind of ends with the Messiah. He kind of had a film about Marx that he was been trying to make as well.
yeah,
But
yeah. That was
so
he
so
was
this
gonna
is
do that after this, right? When
yeah,
he
yeah.
passed on.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah. So this was kind of his whole trajectory really, and he kind of actually pulls back from some of the I think that towards the end of his life there were things he didn't really like about Open City. He kind of felt it was too emotional and too kind of forceful in some of those things, rather than
yeah,
rather than it being a medium that communicated stuff himself. And it's interesting, I think the film, both in terms of what's shown and the story, but also the way it's shot, is very much about a critique of power. And that's
right.
why we go right back it is a very random start, because it goes right back to the start of the Israel's kings basically, and you have the people coming to Samuel saying, "We want to have a king like all the other countries,
Hmm, hmm.
all the other tribes," and Samuel saying, "Well, yeah, if you do that, then you know bad things are going to happen. You're going to regret it. They're going to force your
Yeah,
sons into service and stuff," which is I think is in the original text, and but they ignore him. They go ahead with it, and pretty much sooner or later, then that's exactly what's happening. And then
yeah,
there's this really abrupt cut to King Herod that kind of basically is a way of showing, saying this is a kind of continuation of all that happened hundreds of years ago, and now we've got this king this violent king, and that kind of critique of power it runs right through the film, as you've said, and it's underplayed by this attempt to be neutral in how he tells it, and so he's not trying to force, he's not trying to kind of force a particular point necessarily.
Right.
Although it
Right.
doesn't go as far as Struve do with some of theirs, but yeah, so that's really interesting. And he develops this technique, this kind of zoom technique, as you said. He kind of actually builds his own lens. It's this kind of Pancino technique that he uses, using this kind of special lens that allows him to kind of do this kind of gradual zooming in. I mean, these shots are lasting minutes. It's kind
Oh
of
yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
series of shots like this, and kind of zooming in and then zooming out and putting that in the context of the overall thing, and then finding another part of the action to put things in. And again, this was part of this kind of neutrality, but it was also a practical. I mean, it was also a practical move from his point of view. He kind of realized that he could shoot these scenes, get them in one take, and then he would save himself hours in the editing studio rather than trying to get a
That's
perfect
true.
shot
Yeah.
of 10 seconds long and then do another one and do another, and be messing around with different takes. And the thing, he kind of realized he could do films on a low budget and kind of churn them out's not quite the right word, but he could get across what he wanted to get across, what his artistic persona wanted to communicate, and in a very simple way, because then you just got the huge big strip, and that's the best one, and you go with it. So but I find that I kind of love the technique and the way it kind of,
Oh, me
you're not
too.
sure where it's going to go and where the action's going to go. It kind of
Yeah.
breaks that. It breaks that kind of tightness of the scene that these two people are going to talk, or this group of people are going to talk, and then the action's
Yeah.
going to cut, and we're going to leave that room, and we're going to go to this room. And I mean, there's obviously cuts between scenes, but it's
Right.
it's a really interesting way of doing it, and it's both it's a medium is the message thing, even though
Mm.
part of the reason for the medium is a kind of time-saving measure. But
Right. What I also took from the fact that he wasn't cutting often in these long scenes, and for example, yet he has all these men working together, men and women
yeah,
working together, and he was sort of emphasizing, sorry, that as Jesus was saying, we're all equal, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's I'm not sure if he said this or I read it online, but someone said it's like it's a Marxist Christ. I think they said that about Pasolini as well. That
yeah,
everybody is equal. He also, the Last Supper, the breaking of the bread and the sharing the bread, and
yeah,
there's a lot of people working together, and again, it really heightens the sort of ridiculousness of the class, these
mm,
class structures. But I also like that one scene where the apostles were criticizing some of the I'm not sure exactly who they were criticizing, but they were criticizing people who were exploiting the poor, and he had said to them, don't judge them. You might,
mm,
what's, you're not going to get, if you don't want to be judged, you shouldn't judge either, right?
yeah,
So he, it's, again, it goes back to the love thine enemy. um and it just works so seamlessly, I felt. And even the crucifixion, like, I mean, you don't see him getting whipped. You
mm,
don't, before you know it, like, he's just on the cross. They don't show him getting nailed. I mean, that whole that whole violent act is not shown at all. How did you think Rossellini, did you feel he dealt well with the scene of the Jewish men getting Pontius Pilate to kill Christ? I mean, he has like maybe a handful of men.
yeah.
Did you, he he
I
doesn't.
think it's one of the best. I think it's
Yeah.
one of the best takes from that point of view in some ways, because um, and it's not perfect by any means, but because you have the same huge courtyard that you see in some of the other films, but it is a small group, and it
Yeah.
is the high priest's mate, and that, I think that seems to come through from the text, or certainly, certain versions of it. There are obviously 4 versions of it, but and so and around the whole film you get this whole sense of, I think one of the problems with a lot of Jesus films is that basically people fall into 2 camps. There's, even the ones that kind of are at pains to point out the fact that Jesus was Jewish and his early followers were Jewish, it becomes this kind of thing of, well, here are no one would say the word, but here are the good Jews, and they're all going to end up being Christians and following Jesus, and here are the bad Jews, and they,
Right.
they don't like what Jesus says, and they criticize him, they don't follow him, and it's just completely binary. There's no neutrals. There's no people that didn't hear the story. There's no people that don't really care, or and I think what we get in Rossellini in this film is, for a start, you have this wide range of Jewish people, and in the scenes in Jerusalem, you've got life just kind of panning out, and the kind of characters are popping in and out. But again, it's these wider shots and picking out bits of the actions, but there's all this other action going on that's not brought into it, and I think it emphasizes really well this kind of the fact that this was a thing that happened in that context.
It's not like a big event. It's just happening. Yeah.
No, and there weren't that many people that were particularly committed to Jesus at the point he died, or shortly afterwards. And so, and there were hundreds of thousands of people in Jerusalem at that time, and only a handful really. We got any evidence that they were supporting were involved in what was going on. And so, and then having had that kind of sense of all these ordinary people just getting on with their ordinary lives. And you've mentioned the kind of the village scenes and the people working. They're some of my favorites. They're one of the things I really love about the film is these scenes of the kind of the village life and the kind of community there, and the Jesus preaching while he's working and is still kind of doing a job. And that kind of existence, and that, I guess, that kind of working class existence as well. These people haven't just kind of, often Jesus films feel a little bit like Jesus and the disciples go off on the gap year, and and it all goes a bit wrong, and it's kind of this thing. It feels much more woven into their lives, I think, in a way.
Definitely.
And
I particularly like the scene with when he has the fish net with all the men, and they're collecting the fish, and he says, he's like, he compares it to life, I believe. He's like, oh, sorry, he compares it to going to the kingdom of heaven. It's like you drop the net and the good ones get in and the bad ones fall out. I thought that, it was kind of funny in a way, but it was a good, I like that he's always working with everybody. He was never like,
and
he's
really,
not just some
really
guy walking on
those stories as well. So you have all of that, and then it kind of comes to the big, what in a lot of other films is the big showdown scene, but here it's much more a private affair, and it's
very much so.
These guys know each other, and there's just a few of them, and even the way it's, Tad Gallagher, who's Rossellini's most comprehensive biographer, talks about this, about the kind of the way that scene is shot. You've almost got kind of Jesus standing in judgment over Pilate and standing in judgment over the priest, which is really interesting as well. So that's another nice element of that scene. But certainly it kind of plays down all that. And I think that the fact that Jesus goes from the judgment and then he's on the cross, and the crucifixion is almost a kind of incidental thing that's happening over there. Like, Jesus and Jesus's mother and the disciple John kind of almost miss it because there's confusion about what's going on. It's often the case with these legal affairs and stuff like that, and they kind of, and all that kind of procedural stuff is skipped over. And so so I think it's surprising the way it's done. I think it's always, because so many films do those scenes at length. Mel Gibson being the most prominent
Oh
an
God,
extreme
yeah.
example
The
of
whole
that.
movie. Yeah.
But certainly, you know, some films just tell that story. I mean, Jesus Christ Superstar is not dissimilar.
Right.
You know, it goes slightly wider at this time period, but um, because of that, I find when they're short like that, it's almost shocking in themselves. It's almost a kind of, and it's kind of, you know, this was a matter of fact thing for the Romans. This was a everyday reality part of life for them,
Yeah.
and in that part of the world,
Yeah.
and it also puts the emphasis back onto Jesus' life and his teaching, and not
Yes.
this
Yes.
this you know you know, this kind of moment of sacrifice and the death, which, you know,
Right.
is is a, you know, is obviously is a pivotal part of the story, but it gives it that broader context, and you know, and a bit like, you know, the Gospels do this as well. The amount of chapters that are given over to Jesus actually being crucified, and the verses that that talk about, you know, they're very matter of fact. Jesus was flogged and then he was crucified, and you know, there are kind of bits of discourse built around it, but actually the kind of biblical precedent you know, for Jesus getting told he's going to get crucified and then being crucified is right there. It's, you know, you just got to kind of look at Mark's gospel, and that's, you know, yeah, that part of things happens. You know, there's a lot around, you know, around bits of it, but it's, you know, it's not unprecedented, I guess is what I'm saying. Badly.
So in the Gospels, they don't go into detail about Pontius Pilate and bringing out Barabbas and
Well, no, some of those elements are there, and
okay, okay.
but I mean, I think you're kind of talking. I mean, Mark's Gospel is the shortest. You've kind of got 15 and a half chapters, and it takes 2 chapters. So yeah, and that's the whole. You know, that's the whole
I
thing.
see. Right.
But of that, a lot of that is taken up with. I mean, I can't remember the verses now off the top of my head, but a lot of that's taken up with kind of from Gethsemane through to, and the kind of temptation of Geth, the, you know, the yeah, being in Gethsemane and the praying in Gethsemane, and then the arrest, and then the kind of the various trials, if we can call them that, and culminating in kind of Pilate condemning him to death, and the kind of story of Barabbas, and all those other bits. So that, you know, so those are all there, and kind of dealt with at length. But actually, that moment of the gap between he's going to be crucified, you know, when it kind of talks about him being crucified, I mean, I'm tempted to kind of like see if I've got it word for word, you know, on my iPad here, but I think it might take a bit too long. But it, you know, it's a lot. The detail is kind of a particular. I mean, I think particularly if you've just kind of watched the Mel Gibson version, or even the Jesus Nazareth version, it goes very kind of quickly into, you know, through some of the things that really held on. So the flogging is mentioned more or less just as he was flogged, and then you kind of start to get him, you know, on the road to the cross, and Simon of Cyrene and some of the other bits. And again, the bit where, you know, he's crucified, yes, you get the kind of words afterwards, and you get a bit of a description, but again, that moment, you know, we're not told about the nails going through the hands, we're not told about, you know, how he's put. There's no kind of description there. It just kind of says, and, you know, and
I
Jesus was
see.
crucified. And it's yeah. So So I think in terms of proportion, and this is true the other gospels as well. The chapters aren't the number of kind of chapters given over to it aren't that many compared to the whole book. You know,
I see.
they're substantial, and some of the pivotal moments that people tend to think, well, you can't just, you know, whip past that bit, but actually, whip's an unfortunate word in this context, but you can't just speed past them. And, but actually, you know, some of those details are dealt with very quickly because,
Right.
I mean, the original audience, they knew about crucifixion.
Right.
They knew about the horror of it. They didn't. A mention of it was, you know, enough to to kind of trigger them. They didn't need to kind of have all the detail gone through, I suppose.
I see. No, well,
I feel
I
I've
thought
rambled there. Sorry.
no, not at all. Because just to, when I was watching it, I was thinking about that. It was, because all the things you mentioned, like the Bible doesn't indicate that there was these like big crowds, right? But and
Mm.
Rossellini only
I mean, it says
has,
crowd, but it doesn't. Yeah,
yeah,
it
yeah,
doesn't.
but exactly,
That's
but
a
a
very
crowd can
ambiguous
be,
term when you think about it.
that's true. A crowd can be
Yeah,
6, right? 7.
yeah.
And it just has these few, people. And, I think the, this idea of, the people wanting a king, long before Jesus was born, and then,
Mm,
getting one, and then those people end up being corrupt again and again. And so now we have Jesus saying that he's the son of God, and people, and I think it just really came across much more so how that was terrifying for them. They thought, oh,
mm,
what's this guy gonna do? And finding out about his miracles, and is he gonna do, um it just showed how scared. I mean, I really took it that way. I mean, I felt that way in Son of Man as well. I thought that came across that for them it was just because of their history. It was rather terrifying for them to think that um this person was going to rule over them, and what may he do, um and but another thing was, you don't even know who Judas is until like the very end,
mm.
until they were like, can I have a word with you? And then the
Yeah.
next scene, and then you're like, right, that okay, this is going to be the betrayer. And um it again, it's just all so seamless. And that last shot was so beautiful, with Mary holding him,
Mm,
the dead body. And then, the and even again, how quiet it was. I mean, he really shows them picking up his body, moving the body over to the tomb, like
mm,
he goes through it all, like just that, this the procedure of, like, you just felt like you're watching a funeral. Like it was really,
mm.
it was really quiet, really beautiful done. Beautifully done. I was glad I finally saw it, because
Yeah.
the only reason I know it is because Scorsese. I mean, I know Rossellini well, but for some reason, this is just not one that's people talk about that much.
No.
You know,
Yeah. I
which
mean, I
is
think
a
that.
shame.
I mean, there have been there were kind of various goings on in terms of rights and complications along the lines of that. And I think that's even 50 years later is kind of has hampered it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, you're right. It doesn't get the credit it deserves really. I keep
No,
hoping
not at all. Not
Marty
at
will do
all.
something about it, but I think there's just legal
Yeah.
issues still around it. But
It was really exceptional. I don't. Again, the cast. Um, I don't know if he was using. No, I don't believe these were like people who weren't acting. It's not like Pasolini, where he would use amateurs.
yeah, no,
Because
actually they were
Oh, were they
largely
mostly?
largely non-professionals on this as well. Yeah,
Because this Pier Maria Rossi played Jesus.
yeah,
Oh yeah, so
he
yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, because he was in a couple of things before this.
yeah. So I think he done, as you say, he'd done a couple of things, but generally they were
Yeah,
I
so
think
so
the
that
Mary was played by so Mary's
Mita
Mita
Ungaro.
yeah. So her mum had been in Rossellini's St. Francis film, another one of his history films. And she, I think, was a producer by that point, but I don't think she had much experience. Um, so yeah, so it's interesting that he kind of went, yeah, that
Yeah.
he went
Well,
on with
that
that,
yeah, that was so common amongst particularly the neorealists
yeah, yeah,
to utilize not non-professional actors. But
mm,
um no, it's really wonderfully done. I was glad that you suggested discussing it today, because I'm not
yeah.
sure when I would have got to it. but I'm glad I did because it's really, really, really good.
Yeah, well,
So
I mean,
hopefully
I've
one
really enjoyed
day,
talking.
yeah, hopefully
Sorry.
one day there'll be a Blu-ray of it, or someone will remaster it,
Oh, that would be
Kino or
nice, wouldn't
Criterion or
it?
someone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We've managed to get the legal wranglings out of the way because,
Yeah,
yeah, I do think, I do think it deserves to be seen more widely. And I've really enjoyed talking about it with you because it's not a film that people talk about a lot, and
yeah.
and I know how much you kind of like me, like kind of mid 20th century Italian
Oh
cinema.
yeah, absolutely.
So it was a it was a no-brainer when it came to which one we should discuss, really. So
Oh,
um,
definitely. No, great suggestion. And where now I imagine people can get the book pretty much anywhere online.
uh, yeah, so you can get it from all the usual bookstores online, including the one that got mentioned a while ago. um, yeah, so
Okay, great. Great. Yeah, well it's a wonderful, like I said, it's a wonderful book. Highly recommended. 100 Bible films. And thanks so much again, Matthew. I appreciate that you took the time to come on.
well,
So
I've really enjoyed it. So thank you
yeah,
for
me
having
me
me
as
on.
well. And you're on for social media, Twitter
Yes,
mainly.
I'm just
Yeah.
Matt Page. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I'll leave the uh link in the description box below for where you can follow Matthew online. And again, check out his book. So Matthew, thanks again, and come again
Oh, thank
sometime.
you. Yeah, I
We'll
will do.
discuss
Yeah.
another one.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and or listening. If you are currently listening to this on the audio version of my YouTube channel and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode that I have ever recorded can be found, youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. And lastly, if this is your first time here on my YouTube channel and you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head on the top left corner to your top left. In just a second, just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.